har ret. Du har ret, når du siger.
I'm Emily Weija, and tonight I'm chatting with Klaus K, a Danish musician, producer, and journalist. Klaus currently tours with his band Danser med Drenge and writes extensively about smoking bans and the rise of anti-smoking culture on his blog and for various Danish publications. Welcome, Klaus.
Thank you, and thank you very much for being here.
Before we get into some of your more journalistic efforts, I wanted to talk about you as a musician. You're known to many Danes as a musician, as a rock musician. And in that capacity, you've also been involved with standing up against smoking bans. And I read that in 2008 you formed a band called the Gule Negl. Is that right?
The Yellow Nail.
Nail. That's it.
Yellow Nail.
I got it.
We were four very well-known musicians in Denmark forming that band, and the others were more known than I am. These are the top guys of the Danish charts through many, many years, you know. And they're like in their 60s now. And we did that. We did a song. We did a protest, an official protest, went on the record and did a press conference. And we did a song. And the song, we called the band the Yellow Nail, you know, just thought that was funny.
What was the meaning of the yellow nail?
Oh, there's a tobacco nail, you know.
I got it. Okay. So with this band, it was quite interesting. I read that you also took a photo, which we're going to show, on the steps of the Ministry of Culture in Copenhagen. And that was an allusion to a protest that happened in the 1960s. Is that right?
Right. When the artists at that time, they protested against cannabis prohibition. And so they went to the stairs of the Ministry of Culture because, you know, that was the artists' ministry, if you know what I mean. And then they smoked cannabis on the stairs. And so today, 38 years later, we did it with cigarettes. And my friend Johnny Madsen, one of the other musicians, he said, well, in 36 years, it will be candy.
Yeah. Or hamburgers, could be.
Hamburgers, yeah, maybe. It was just an, what do you call that? It was just an act we did, you know, to go on the record. And you know, it's on the record now. Every time there's a visitor in the old buildings, you know, these ministries are some very old buildings in Denmark. The tourists can read about that we did that and sat there. Yeah.
So have you had much reaction from fans of your music in regards to the things that you've written about smoking?
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Through the years, everybody knows my opinion about it. But our fans to our band, I think they supported. Most of them, I think, are not that aware of all the problems, but some of them are, and most of them support it.
And what made you start actually researching the science behind smoking bans, behind anti-smoking?
That was because of the smoking ban. You know, we've been noticing, of course, for very many years that there's been anti-smoking measures in Denmark too. But the smoking ban came in August 2007, and that was a huge change in society. There was, you know, suddenly it was not possible, you know it, to go to a cafe and have a meeting and you know, and smoke. And it's not like, you know, it's worse here where it's cold weather almost all year round. It's only these 2-3 months in the summer where you can sit outside. But it was a huge change. So I went to this restaurant, which I always did all my life. I had a lot of business meetings, you know, and I thought it could not be true. None of us thought that it would succeed, the smoking ban. And suddenly I realized that it might succeed. And so I you know, stopped going to cafes and bars and restaurants even. And I sat down and I read everything about tobacco through the internet. And I got, you know, have actually read extensively papers from the Tobacco Archive, that was put on the internet by the anti-smoking guys in the USA. There's a very, very, very many papers, scientific papers and other papers to read, and it has been very interesting, I think, very interesting.
You assert that pharmaceutical companies are benefiting from anti-tobacco and anti-smoking legislation in several ways. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's the same. They benefit from cannabis prohibition too. That's well known in the USA, and it's the same with tobacco. Anything that any natural stuff like smoke, like tobacco or cannabis or any plant, that's cheap and people can calm off by them, they will be attacked by the pharmaceutical industry, because the pharmaceutical industry lives off synthetic, exactly the same drugs, synthetic, and will earn a lot of money from that because they're patented in some years. So they are in the back of the war against tobacco. It's a pharmaceutical business, the whole medical business.
Right, and you assert that in large part that's because the pharmaceutical industry profits by selling nicotine replacement therapy. Is that right?
Not just nicotine, Emily, but like antidepressants and a lot of other stuff. What do you call it? Opioids?
Yep.
Is that what I call it?
Yep.
And a lot of stuff, because you sit and smoke now, and you use smoking to calm you down and to be in a better mood maybe. And without smoking, imagine if smoking was prohibited, then you would have to go to the pharmaceutical industry to have the same effect. And of course, that's why they attack it. And they have very, very many professors and experts and scientists on their payroll. And they get an amount of money each year, not very much, but just a little, enough to make them beholden of the pharmaceutical companies. And so that's how it works.
You wrote about, I think a case in 2011 was brought against the FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, by two tobacco companies, and their suit alleged that several of the scientists who had consulted on several very high-profile reports, which led to many smoking bans and also led to policy about nicotine use, were actually on the payroll of pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, they were supposed to be impartial experts for the U.S. government, but they were in fact paid by the pharmaceutical governments at the same time. So they were working for the American government, but also they had this huge tie, an economical tie to decades with the big pharmaceutical giants. And it is quite amazing that no one pointed a finger and said, hey, these guys, they're not impartial.
Can you talk a little bit more about the two reports that were concerned in the lawsuit?
Well, there was a nicotine addiction report in 1988, which, had been very extensivly debunked several places by several scientists, and also in a lawsuit in Scotland in 2005. That's one report, the nicotine addiction report, which was in fact merely a scientific advertising paper for Nicorette.
Right.
They made smokers imagine that they were addicted to cigarettes, and therefore they should use Nicorette. That's the whole thing, and it looks like an advertising paper. If you read it through, read the whole report, you'll see this is an advertising document.
And this was published in 1988. Is that right?
1988. That's true.
I think nowadays, if you asked any person on the street, they would take it as completely accepted that smokers are addicted to nicotine.
But that's because they believe in government.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The whole problem, they believe in government.
Yeah, it's astounding to learn that what could possibly be the basis for a lot of beliefs people have about smokers and nicotine was actually, was actually written by people who had a very strong interest in presenting that as being the case.
Of course, and some of them even had businesses that worked with the pharmaceutical industry selling nicotine products, non-pharmaceutical nicotine products. But today, in at least 5 or 10 years, some of the experts from that time, they today say nicotine is not addictive. It has nothing to do with that because you cannot show addiction in nicotine in snus. You cannot show it in cigarettes. You cannot show it in what do you call the thing you put on your arm to
the patch. The patch.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And you cannot show it anywhere else. It is cigarettes may be what some people would call addictive, but it has nothing to do with nicotine, at least on its own. And that's been shown in animals too, in control studies in animals too. Animals do not show there's an addiction to nicotine. That has been disproven by the animal studies.
I wonder why do you think it is that things like this have not been widely reported in the mainstream media?
That's because the media write the pharma truth. But they do that quite extensively. It's very, very rare that you see a media report or media articles where this is revealed. The truth of these sites is revealed. Every time it's something with smoking, it's bad. The other report is just as important. There was a report on passive smoking, 2006, secondhand smoke, and the guy who was the leader, the scientific expert number one on this, he's called Jonathan Samet. And he had extensive ties with Pfizer and GlaxoSmithKline also to many years. And he has been he's also been the leader of the EARC report 2004 about passive smoking, secondhand smoke. And it has been shown that they have cheated in that report. This is shown by James Enstrom in his scientific paper from 2007, which is on the internet too. So in fact, and they cheated with some figures in order to support that the very the very weak evidence that passive smoking should mean anything to health, to public health, and to individual health. In fact, there's cheating, real cheating, which is what do they call it? Bias in situ. In that report, you can go ahead and read James Enstrom on the internet. You will find it right there. So that was the two reports that was used as arguments for putting smoking bans in place in Europe, and they are financed, both of them, by the pharmaceutical top industry companies.
The Danish government claimed that smokers were costing 8.6 billion more per year than non-smokers. Now, you wrote about this claim being basically fake news. Is that right?
It's totally fake news, because and this was a fake study. And what was appalling was that it was the biggest pharmaceutical company in the world, Pfizer, who did this study with people inside the Danish government, people who are not really clever. And they pursued them, or what do you call it? They made them believe that this was true if they did the study in a certain way. And it was very clear that the study was totally biased and not, taking into consideration the tobacco taxes, which are 10 million a year in Denmark, 10 million Danish kroner. I don't know how much that is, which is higher than these costs that they found.
So there was no mention made of tobacco taxes in this article.
No. And there was, and it was in fact it was a kind of a hate speech, because it clearly wanted to make non-smokers angry that they were paying a lot of taxes to smokers, which the truth is the other way around. It's smokers supporting non-smokers in government pays. So smokers, they contribute more to society than non-smokers do, because non-smokers, they live so long. They live maybe, and nobody knows if it's smoking that's the reason. Could be just because a lot of smokers are workers. They live shorter. Mm-hmm. They live until their 70s, while the non-smokers live until their 90s. Many of them, the academics at least. And so it was a total lie that was all over the media. And it was very appalling, because they did this study. It was so biased and bad. And so I wrote about it, and it in fact made them shut up.
Did it?
Yeah. But I couldn't get them to change the article on the government website. It still has the same headline, that smokers cost more than non-smokers, which is a complete and utter lie. I mean, it is. And this the thing I wanted, the meaning was that since smokers cost more than non-smokers, we should support with public money smoking cessation. Pfizer's smoking cessation products, right?
Yep.
And that's what the whole idea of this study. And it was very satisfying for me to do this article, because everybody, in the comments and the media and in the blogs and in Facebook and everywhere, saw that they were trying to cheat. They were trying to cheat and to tell people a lie. That was very clear.
And I noticed that in 2016 you published an article which points out that there was a comprehensive statistical analysis done of all 102 published studies on the relationship between passive smoking and lung cancer. Was this something that had only come out in 2016?
Well, it's been clear for a while that approximately 85% of the studies that have been done, these are epidemiological studies. They measure people who say that they have been exposed to passive smoking and see their diseases, and people who say they have not been exposed to passive smoking and see their diseases, and compare. That's what they do. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons for any difference. But if you take it seriously, then in fact, it has been clear for a long time that 85% of these studies do not show connection. 85%. And it has not changed over the years. Now there are 102 studies as per 2016. 102 of these big studies. It costs money to know. They're expensive to do. And when you do the right controlling for confounding, that's what these British statisticians showed us. Then there is no correlation between passive smoking and lung cancer in Europe and the USA. Now that's strange, but there is a little connection in Asia. How could that be? That's strange. Don't think that's strange.
Yeah, it is strange.
It's very small. It's very small in Asia. It's very small. So, in fact, these epidemiological studies, which are the ones that are always supported as the argument for the smoking bans, they show that there's no connection. There's no connection.
I say this to almost everyone I interview, but I'd like to hear what you think. So I've noticed in the past 5 years or so that we've seen more and more anti-smoking campaigners basically admit that their reason for pushing through smoking bans was actually not to protect non-smokers from harm, but it was really to force smokers into quitting. And do you feel, I guess this brings us back to the issue of...
That's of course true. That's true, of course.
Yes, yeah, it's true. It's true, but it's interesting that they are admitting it, I think, now. Maybe It's we have an expression in English that's was it closing the barn door after the horse has left the stall. You know, I think that they've already pushed through the bans, so maybe there's no harm in admitting it. But it brings us back to the issue of firsthand smoking, and you know whether it's actually that harmful for the smoker, him or herself. And so I guess I want to ask you: do you think smoking is harmful? And if so, does the government actually have the right to try to pressure people into quitting smoking?
No, absolutely not. The government should not decide what people put in their mouth. No, I'm very clear on this, and I think many people are.
Yeah.
No, they have no right to do that. But is smoking, to some people, smoking may not be good. When they smoke for like 40 years, 50 years as I've done, I mean, you can feel that smoking is may, you know, make you a little slower. You understand? But there's no evidence. That's completely crazy. The only evidence that smoking should cause cancer, that's the epidemiological evidence, and that could be highly biased, even by doctors. You know, because a doctor will never give you a cancer diagnosis in the lung, for instance, a lung cancer diagnosis, if he does not know on forehand if you're a smoker or not.
Yep. I've heard people say that.
Yeah, that's true. And because if he says you have got lung cancer, you got to stop smoking, and say, well, I've never smoked. That's, you know, it's so what do you call it? It's they learn it in the medical school.
It's so ingrained, I think is the word.
Yeah, and you know, there's not even evidence. That's not hard controlled study evidence. In fact, in animal studies, again, it has been impossible to impose lung cancer tumors, malignant lung cancer tumors, in animals and in the throat, you know.
Yep.
In controlled studies, it's not been possible. In fact, what happens in many of these controlled animal studies, the animals who get tobacco smoke instead of air, they live longer, Emily. Now, how do you figure that? They live longer. That's strange, isn't it?
It is very strange.
Is there something in tobacco smoke that leads to a longer life? That's strange and does not at all correlate with the epidemiological studies in humans.
It doesn't.
Where they lose 10 years of life. But, you know, that could be confounded by the mere fact that, you know, workers are smokers and workers die early. We know that.
I've even seen it suggested that it could be something like maybe a smoker has a certain gene that makes them want to smoke, but also might make them more prone to get certain cancers. So, you know, it could also be, you know, the other way around.
That's also an explanation, but you know, if you think about it, your personality is inherited. You have inherited your personality from your mother or father's side of your family. And that's quite clear. And if you see your brother or sister, if you have any brothers or sisters, you'll see some of them are exactly opposite to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not because of the environment when you were a kid. It's because of your genes. They fill out differently in you and your sister or brother or whatever it is. And many people know that. And this personality, it goes with smoking too. If you have a personality, you're a little tense, you know, and like that, then you have a tendency to smoke. If you're a very cool and calm guy or woman, then you may not have a tendency to smoke. But it's inherited. That's the point. Smoking may be inherited very much, but most of it been inherited. That's why this is the only thing that's true on the statement on the cigarette packets. Is that smokers' kids, they tend to have a higher tendency to smoke than non-smokers' kids. And that's true because of the inheritance. It's because they inherited their tendency to smoke.
How bad do you think things are going to get for smokers before they get better, if they do get better?
I think we need a war.
Oh, yeah?
A war will come. Yes, not a war on smokers. I don't think so. But we need a war, because the expectations is much too high for making the world a better place. And the humans will find out in a couple of years, 5-10 years from now, that they have to lower the expectations for a better world very much. That's empiric. You can go back in society and see it's exactly the same thing we thought. That was the same thing we thought in the 20s and the 30s in USA and Europe. And, people think that suddenly that man can do everything. And then, things happen that are really bad. And they realize, hey, we couldn't do anything. We couldn't do all that. We could not make the world better on this and that point. And they cannot eradicate smoking. That's a completely idiotic idea. They already know they couldn't eradicate cannabis. So you cannot eradicate plants. That's so dumb. And people will still want it, like they want cannabis. It's the same.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Klaus.
Well, my pleasure, Emily.
Når du siger